Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, along with Mustapha Price, our show's producer, and this is episode 149, where we're going to be talking about how to find your ideal player. So I can't think of how many times we have discussed or at least mentioned the importance of knowing your audience, but never took the time to really dig deep and explain what exactly that entails or how to really know what is going on in your ideal player's head. So that's why Mustapha and I wanted to dive deep in this conversation to explain the reasoning behind this, what the process entails, and ultimately determine where exactly you can find your ideal player. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back, and how's it going? I got Mustapha here with me. Mustapha, how's it going, buddy?
Doing great. Feels good to be back. I feel like I haven't been on one of these since the Supergiant one.
Yeah, it's been a while, so
yeah.
Long overdue to have one of our own discussions and everything, so yeah, man, I missed you.
Hey, missed you too. Glad to be back at it.
No, it's not like Mustapha and I don't talk in between episodes and stuff either, but it's not the same. It's not the same. All right.
That spring cleaning, it really overtakes you.
Oh, yeah, you're telling
me.
me.
The weather out here would be convinced otherwise.
Right? I still have so many leftover leaves from October, the fall, and yeah, it's doing a number on me. And it's to say that I need to work out more, do some type of exercise, something. Anyways, we're not here to hear me whine about how sore I am from like things that most people shouldn't be sore from, I guess. But anyways, yeah, so today we're here to talk about how to find your ideal player, because let's face it, there's been so many times on this show that we talk about, know your audience and have empathy and all these other factors. And yes, we do go into some detail within the context of that particular episode, but we never really have gotten to the point, at least I'm pretty sure we haven't, where we do a deep dive to really understand and know like how to find your ideal player. And quite frankly, that's all what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to create communities and get a player base, so when your game gets released that people are actually playing it. That's the goal here. So we wanted to kind of like go into a little bit more here with finding out how, who is your ideal player, how do you find them, and things like that. So let's kick it off, Mustapha, and with being like, where do you think are the best places to find your ideal players?
Whew, man, now that right there, loaded question. but I think I have a pretty concise answer, actually. The best place to find your players is at the games that they're playing, right? I mean, I would say generally speaking, especially first-time devs, especially first-time indie devs, it's probably not likely that you're going to be looking to make something that has the broad mass appeal of Madden or Mario Party, right? You're probably creating something a little bit more on the niche side, which means it's likely something inspired by, in some sense, an experience you've had with a game, or providing a solution for a problem or gap in the existing library of games that you're aware of, which means that there's likely already an existing audience for it, already playing other games that are similar to yours. So I would say that's a great place to look. Meet people where they are, so to speak.
Yeah, and one thing I want to pick out of that, what you just said, that's I think is going to really help people find out and answer this question through this discussion we're having today, is you mentioned about solving a problem. So you led in with like, hey, there's big titles or even more like niche titles that are similar to something that our listeners are making today, but you mentioned about having a problem. And I think this is one of the trickiest parts is what is their problem, right? What is the problem that players are having with the games? And I'll be honest with you, this is part of the most frustrating part of the process, at least this and knowing more about really getting into the player's head of who your ideal player is. And so in terms of the problem, I would love to talk a little bit about that more as well, too, because part of what you said, too, I feel, is sometimes devs can get like too focused on their game and maybe how it can compare to other games and stuff as that being the primal focal point to determining their audience. Now, obviously, it's still important. We still got to consider those other games that it's like. But to really get more into it, finding out what that problem, or another way of phrasing it is pain point. What is that player pain point? So, what are some ways, Mustapha? I know you're working on your own thing, your own game project, and everything. What are some ways that you guys have gone across in terms of finding out what your potential, player pain point is? And you alluded to it in your last comment too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give an example from us, and then I think I have a better example that probably would resonate more with people, probably has some wider reaching application. But on our side, the game that we're making right now is it's a deck builder that is intended to have kind of a somewhat competitive edge to it, but it's also intended to be very party game friendly. So we try to keep the rules simple, try to, create engaging cards with kind of comedic undertones, and leveraging that. I think the pain point that we're kind of striking at is learning curves in card games.
Yep.
A game like Magic is very rewarding to play. Same with stuff like Yu-Gi-Oh, right? But I think as you kind of ease away from the target demo of TCGs or trading card games specifically, it becomes very difficult to become invested without necessarily having the background knowledge to overcome some of those learning curves. And I wouldn't necessarily see that those are a problem with those games at all. I just think it's something that we can create something to remedy that for players who maybe want the fun and experience of strategizing with a card game, but don't necessarily have, say, the time or resources to dedicate to overcoming some of those learning curves. So that's kind of the problem or pain point that we identified. And the overall aesthetic and approach to our design philosophy is suited specifically to overcoming that. But sometimes you don't even get that part of the process before the game's made. Looking at like over the last year, obviously we've seen the incredible surgence of the popularity of Among Us, as well as Fall Guys. Like those two games in particular defined a lot of the conversation around video games over the entirety of 2020. I would say it was those two and Animal Crossing. And Cyberpunk, but so I would say with that in mind, I mean the problem wasn't necessarily a game design problem or a game accessibility problem at all. It was a societal problem. It was a lack of social gatherings and the inability to engage in social experiences the way that we're used to. And so the games service that need by creating at least a similar experience, supplementing what we were kind of universally lacking just by the way that they were made. So the problem might not even be a game problem. It's kind of I would say one of the most inherent principles of business, right? I mean, whatever it is that you're creating, it has to service a gap, whether that gap is in what games are available or what we as people are in the mood for or craving. I think very rarely you find something like loneliness or isolation to be so universal. So I think it might be difficult to have that broad of an appeal while aiming to appease that pain point. But there are probably still smaller things that you could pick up on and grab a much larger audience by servicing.
Yeah, and I want to say that I think that was a great example from, a broad perspective too, because I think what that showcases is basically the breadth of like the various pain points, right? And I'll give a couple examples too, because it's like one, you were talking about yourself and you're like, okay, there could be, there's potential learning curves when it comes to some card games and stuff. And we want to part of our take is addressing that. And then with the pandemic and people not being socially, there's another pain point that's addressed that originally wasn't even probably really number one intention of those games. It wasn't like they were purposely trying to solve that, but by naturally they did, right? So in other areas in terms of addressing pain points too, it could be something as looking at yourself and you as the game maker, the developer, and finding out what is the main reason you're making the game, right? And I would say most likely and most chances are you're making it out of your own pain point. And if you look at any like up and rising entrepreneurial product or service that's out there, like just about in any other industry, a lot of the times people will make things out of their own pain points. Man, there's like so many random ideas coming through my head on what people have done, but like the main thing I would say is, why are you making your game? What's one of the main reasons? Let's say you really wanted a particular game made that you thought there was other great titles that you loved growing up with, but they didn't necessarily address that one mechanic or aspect or whatever that you really wanted to see in it, and no one else is doing it, and you're like, I just really want to make this game like this because I think it would just be great and I would have fun with it, and I'm sure other people would. Whatever your reasoning behind that is, chances are, and Mustapha mentioned this too, that there's others out there that share that, right? So I would say look at what at the heart and the core of your game is. I mean, yeah, there are going to be mechanics and stuff. I wouldn't focus too much on the mechanics. The mechanics are kind of the mechanism to address the pain point, though, right? Potentially, and then there's other elements too. But look at that aspect and elements of it and find out what is the pain point. Why are you making that game? What's part of the reason for it? And I really hope it's not just for money, because I think we all know by now that that can be a really hard pill to swallow after you start doing it after a while.
Yeah. There are probably much faster ways if that's what you're looking for.
Right. And guess what? If you say to people like, I'm making this game for money, or if it comes off that way, like, do you think like your potential audience or the players care? Because that's not their pain point. You're not addressing their pain point or anything about them at that matter. And as I think we know well enough, it's not all about you. It's about your players and stuff. But a little bit's about you, right? Because you're putting your heart and soul into these projects. So it makes sense. But not making that the absolute focal point. Because I think and keep going.
Yeah, actually, you called back to something that really made me think. It Takes Two, the game that like just came out. It's like, I can't remember his last name. I know his first name's Yosef. He is very famous for cursing out the Oscars at the Game Awards. He had an interview recently where he was discussing that like he believes that It Takes Two and its like kind of breakout success is indicative of the fact that players really do want more co-op games and feel that there simply aren't enough of them. And like, that's another kind of benefit to leveraging the pain point as a principle of design, is that it empowers you through success to validate your claim. And I think through that, you have the ability to kind of influence the directions of the industry. And we've seen that in a number of ways over the last several years.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as we kind of close up this discussion, move on to the next one too, I do want to call out that, like, for anybody who, let's say, still having difficulty or struggling trying to determine, I don't get it, what the player pain point would be. I know I'm just making this game because it's entertaining and people like that. Well, some other really basic strategies that anybody can use, and they're free, is I know this is but it's just like Googling what potential problems are. Like, again, going back to